This is the Elementary Kids Church story for Palm Sunday, April 5th, 2020. Jesus and his disciples were walking towards Jerusalem. As they came to the towns around the city, Jesus sent 2 disciples ahead. "Go to the next village," he told them. "There's a young donkey tied there that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it to me. If anyone asks what you're doing, just say, 'The Lord needs it.'" So they went and found the donkey. Just like Jesus said, the owners asked them why they were untying it. The disciples told them the Lord needed it, and they brought it to Jesus. Some of them took off their coats to make a seat on the donkey for Jesus to ride on. As he rode along and the disciples walked behind, crowds started to gather at the side of the road. Some of them took off their coats and spread them out to make a pathway for Jesus to ride over, and picked up branches to wave. "Hosanna in the highest," they cried. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." The religious leaders who heard them weren't happy with that kind of talk. They didn't think Jesus was any kind of a king. But when they told him to make the people be quiet, Jesus answered, "If they weren't calling out, the stones along the road would burst into cheers." That didn't help. But as much as they hated Jesus for that and for all the other things he had done to upset them, they didn't want to just arrest him. They were afraid of what his followers would do. But then Judas, one of Jesus' closest students, went to the religious leaders to say he would betray Jesus to them and help them to get him when the crowds weren't around. After 4 days in the city, it was time for the Passover celebration. Jesus told Peter and John to prepare the meal, and then he and all the disciples went to where they had set the table. Before they sat down, Jesus kneeled down on the floor with a towel and a bowl of water to wash the disciples' feet. Peter was surprised. "Lord," he said, "you shouldn't be washing my feet." "Unless I wash you," Jesus answered, "you won't belong to me." "Then wash my hands and my head too," said Peter, "not just my feet." Jesus told him, "A person who took a bath doesn't need to wash again except for his feet. And you, my friends, are clean," he went on, "though not all of you." He said, "not all of you," because he knew that Judas was going to betray him. After Jesus had washed the disciples' feet, they sat down to the meal. As Jesus looked around at his friends, he said, "I am so happy to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. I tell you, I won't share another Passover with you until God's kingdom comes." He broke the bread and passed it to them, saying, "Take this bread. It is my body, which is broken for you. Do this to remember me." Then he took the cup of wine and blessed it. "This cup is the new promise between God and God's people," he said. "It's an agreement signed with my blood." Then Jesus told his friends that he knew one of them was going to give him up to the religious leaders and their soldiers. The disciples were all indignant. "I would never do that," said Peter. "I'm ready to go to prison for you, even to die for you." Jesus knew better. "Peter," he said, "let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you'll tell people 3 times that you don't know me." Then Jesus and his friends went out to the Mount of Olives. Jesus told them to wait and pray, and he went a little ways apart from them to pray himself. He asked God to take away the cup of suffering that he was facing, but he also told God that he could understand it if it was all in God's plan. When Jesus had finished praying, he went back to his friends and saw that they were all asleep. They were so tired and sad, they couldn't help it. Just then, a crowd approached, led by Judas. He walked up to Jesus and kissed him, which is the sign that he and the religious guards had agreed on beforehand. "Would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Jesus asked. After they arrested Jesus, the guards brought him to the high priest's house, with Peter following a little ways away. The guards lit a fire in the courtyard of the house and sat around it, and Peter edged closer to be part of the crowd. A servant girl noticed him and started staring. "This man was one of Jesus' followers," she said. "What?" Peter answered. "I don't even know him." A little while later, another man looked at him and said the same thing, and again Peter said he wasn't. Later still, someone else noticed his accent. "Hey, this man must be one of them too," he said, "because he's also from Galilee." Peter cried out, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just then, the rooster crowed, and at that moment Jesus was brought out of the house and looked straight at Peter. All at once, Peter remembered what Jesus had said about how he would deny Jesus. Tears came to his eyes, and he ran from the courtyard. The soldiers started making fun of Jesus and hitting him. They put a blindfold on him and stood around him, hitting him from all sides. "Hey, you're supposed to be a prophet," laughed one of the guards. "Prophesy who is hitting you." When the sun rose, all the religious leaders came to the high priest's house to judge Jesus. The soldiers led Jesus before the assembly, and the chief priest asked him if he was claiming to be God's son. "You say that I am," Jesus answered. "Why do we need other witnesses?" the chief priest exclaimed. "He admits it himself." Then all the religious leaders took Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who was in charge of Jerusalem in those days. After considering, Pilate couldn't find any law that Jesus had broken, and said that he was going to let him go. The religious leaders and the crowd with them weren't happy to hear that. They kept shouting out accusations against Jesus. They wanted Pilate to kill Jesus by hanging him on a cross, to crucify him. Eventually, Pilate bowed to the will of the mob. He handed Jesus back over to the religious leaders and told them to do what they wanted with him. They brought him to a hill called the Skull, where they nailed him to a cross. On either side of him, they also crucified 2 criminals. As he looked at the people who were killing him, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." The religious leaders made fun of Jesus as he hung on the cross. Even one of the criminals dying next to him mocked him. "You say you're the Messiah? Then save yourself and save us too." But the other criminal protested that, unlike them, Jesus hadn't done anything wrong. He asked Jesus to remember him in God's kingdom. By this time, it was the middle of the day, but the sun turned dark. All of a sudden, the curtain inside the holiest part of the temple split in 2, right down the middle. And at that moment, Jesus cried out, "Father, into your hands I give my spirit." And then he died. In a little while, Jesus' body was taken down from the cross, wrapped in linen cloths, and put into a cave carved in a rock. Soldiers rolled a large stone over to cover the entrance to the cave. Jesus' friends, watching all of this from a distance, didn't know what to think.